Reverend Soto's sermon is called Remembering with Honor and Learning in 3 parts. When the nights grow longer and the air smells faintly of rain and smoke, our attention turns backward. We remember our dead. In Mexico, the marigolds that were planted in June and July now bloom bright against the gray, guiding ancestors home for Dia de los Muertos. In Japan, floating lanterns drift downstream in Oban, light upon water. People also may offer food and incense at groves of loved ones. At graves of loved ones. And maybe even light a large bonfire-style flame to show the ancestors the way home. In Jewish homes, a single candle burns for a Yarzeit. A Yarzeit is the yearly anniversary of an important death. People remembering a Yarzeit light a candle at sundown and let it burn for 24 hours, its steady flame whispering, "Love never ends." In churches, the tolling of the bells names those lost, 1 ring for each life, the sound carrying memory through the air. These gestures, flower, flame, sound, are small, but they hold something vast. The ache and the gratitude of being alive at all. Part 1, remembering with honor. To honor the dead is not only to praise them, it is to see them clearly. Our ancestors, whether of blood or of spirit, were not perfect. They carried both light and shadow, by which we consider complexity. To remember them with honor means to tell the truth about them. Some of them were kind, and some were cruel. Some risked everything for love or justice. Some, if we're honest, failed to do the right thing when it mattered most. And we know it doesn't have to be perfect to be awesome. Yet, each of them passed something forward, a story, a gene, a recipe, a warning, a song. One of our unsung ancestors is Amanda America Dixon. Amanda American Dixon was an African-American socialite. She was born in Georgia. She became one of the wealthiest African-American women of the 19th century after inheriting a large estate from her father. The beginning of her story includes a mention of sexual violence. Born into slavery, Amanda America was the child of David Dixon, a white planter, and Julia Frances Lewis Dixon, a young and slender woman who was 13 at the time her daughter was born. David Dixon was about 20 years old at that time. Amanda was raised by Elizabeth Shoulders Dixon, her white grandmother and legal mistress. She was educated and schooled in the social skills of her father's class, and he helped her to enjoy a life of privilege away from the harsh realities of slavery before emancipation. This was the first time Dixon had experienced a situation like it, following the Civil War. In her late 20s, Dixon even attended the Normal School of Atlanta University, a historically black college, attending from 1876 to 1878, which has a similar effect of privilege as attending college today. A normal school is typically a teacher training school. After her father's death in 1885, Amanda America inherited his estate. David Dixon's will left his estate to her and her sound judgment and unlimited discretion, and prohibited interference from anyone, including any husband she might have. 79 of David Dixon's white relatives challenged the will. The Dixon estate included 17,000 acres of land in Hancock and Washington counties in Georgia. And even though it's interesting, Amanda American Dixon's inheritance isn't important because she became wealthy. It's not even important because she won her case. Rather, the reason she won her case is the factor that changed everything for black and mixed-race people in America. In what became known as the David Dixon will case, as we mentioned, 79 white relatives of David Dixon disputed the will in court, mainly arguing that David Dixon was not of a sound mind when he wrote the will, that he was unduly influenced by Amanda America and her mother, Julia Dixon, and that Amanda America was, in fact, not his child. Here, I'll add, he raised her lovingly and knowingly. So that additional piece is pretty much a lot. The same year, the will was approved by the probate court, and then a trial happened in county court. Later that year, Amanda America won the court case. A bit of spooky lore about this case. On October 11th, 1886, Chief Justice James Jackson and the associates Samuel Hall and Mark Blandford heard the case following an appeal. James Jackson expressed his firm conviction against upholding the will, saying, "I would rather die in my place than uphold the will." A few days later, he became ill with pneumonia and died. 8 months after the appeal of the David Dixon will, the Supreme Court of Georgia also ruled in favor of Amanda American and her 2 sons, formally settling the dispute. Here's the reason why this case is important and why Amanda American won. Citing the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the Georgia Supreme Court affirmed the lower court's decision, saying that the rights and privileges of a black woman and her children would be the same as the rights and privileges of a white unmarried partner or an unmarried white woman with children born outside of a legality. So, the same laws govern the rights and privileges of women of both races. It was a mixed-race woman who had the tenacity to fight and win an incredibly complex and litigious will contest by which she was able to establish equal protection under the law for black and white women, a legacy of freedom that remains today. We honor our ancestors by telling their stories whole. We honor you, Amanda American Dixon, by saying, here is who you were, and here is who we have become because of you. The theologian Emily Towns writes, "We must love the folk, not because they are perfect, but because they are ours." That's the task of remembrance with honor, to love honestly, without pretending, without erasing. Part 2, remembering with learning. Memory, if we let it, is a teacher. The dead are not here to defend themselves or to finish their projects, but they keep teaching through the traces they left. Maybe your grandmother taught you how to make bread, and in her patient kneading, you learned something about gentleness. Maybe a teacher or friend showed you what integrity looks like by living it out day after day, even when no one was watching. Maybe you learned from an ancestor you never met, someone whose courage opened the world for you. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about Tisquantum, also nicknamed Squanto, and how he taught the settlers from England to plant and grow food in this land. One indigenous gardening practice that Tisquantum might have used is planting a dead fish with corn. Corn takes out a lot of nitrogen, one of the elements of healthy soil, as it grows. The fish replaces it as it breaks down into the soil. The other gardening practice could have been planting things together that complement each other, such as corn, beans, and squash, a custom called Three Sisters, which is part of an Iroquois creation story, but also a term widely used by many indigenous groups who employ the planting practice. The corn gets planted first. When the corn is as tall as an adult's hand, then the beans and squash get planted. As the corn grows tall, it makes a natural trellis for the beans to climb. As the beans grow, they put nitrogen back into the soil, which helps the corn and squash grow. The beans also offer broad leaves that make shade for the squash. The squash covers the ground with leaves that keep weeds from popping up and keep the ground from drying out under the heat of the sun. In multiple ways, this planting method maximizes the wisdom of the earth and people's opportunity to cooperate with plants. It is important wisdom to remember. The work of remembering with learning is asked with curiosity. What wisdom did our ancestors leave us? What mistakes must we not repeat? How can our ancestors' lives, whether cautionary or inspirational, help us live more faithfully now? If we look closely, the dead are not only behind us, they are within us, in our gestures, our sense of humor, our fears, our longings for home. We are the answer to their prayers. Part 3, the communion of memory. There is an old saying, we live as long as someone remembers our name. That may be true, but I think there's something deeper. When we remember the dead, we remember what it means to belong to the vast web of life. Long ago, 2 men met on the coast of New Jersey. Thomas Potter, a farmer with a fierce and open faith, and John Murray, a preacher who became a Methodist preacher, but then lost his Methodist pulpit when he started teaching that God's love is universal. After he lost his pulpit, John's beloved wife and baby son died. John was brokenhearted and decided to stop being religious. Back in America, Potter could not read, but had still wrestled his way to a belief that God's love must be universal, not reserved for a chosen few. Against the mockery of neighbors, he built a small meeting house and waited 10 years for a messenger who would preach his radical hope. Across the ocean, Murray, shattered by grief and disillusionment, sailed for America, swearing he would never preach again. But fate, or faith, had other plans. When Murray's ship ran aground near Potter's farm, the farmer greeted him not as a stranger, but as the one he had been expecting. The wind will not change, Potter told him, until you have delivered your message. And indeed, the wind held still until Murray rose to speak, until he found his voice again and proclaimed that all souls are held in divine love. When his sermon ended, the wind shifted, freeing the ship. Potter's patience and Murray's reluctant courage joined to spark a movement that would travel far beyond that humble field. That was the beginning of universalism, the second part of our UU name. We live now in the shelter of their choices, the courage to hope when hope seemed foolish, to believe in a love wide enough for everyone. Every act of inclusion, every welcome freely offered, every insistence that no one is beyond grace is a continuation of that moment. Their story reminds us that faith sometimes waits for decades, and that when we dare to answer it, the wind itself begins to move. Every leaf that drifts down becomes part of the soil. Every life that ends becomes part of the ground of being that sustains us. We are the living roots of the ones who came before. And someday, others will grow from the ground we enrich. May it be so. Now please join in singing our closing hymn, number 175.